Silence is a liar. You think a quiet house means peace, but it usually just means the monsters are whispering. I only turned back for a piece of cheap plastic to fix my dead ear. Instead, I heard my daughter plotting a murder, and God help me, I helped. Rain turned the windshield into a blurred, weeping mess. I hated driving in it, especially with my right ear dead to the world. The left side picked up the rhythmic thwap-thwap of the wiper blades, but the right side was stuffed with imaginary cotton. I had left the hearing aid on Harper's kitchen counter. I'm 58, carrying an extra 30 pounds of cheap beer and bad decisions, and my joints pop like bubble wrap when I climb stairs. Forgetting things was becoming a terrifyingly common habit. I pulled the F-150 onto the muddy shoulder of Route 9, cursing the deep ache in my lower back as I wrestled the gear shift into reverse. Harper's driveway was a long ribbon of crushed gravel. It crunched beneath the tires, though I only felt the vibration through the floorboards rather than hearing it properly. I parked near the oak tree, leaving the engine running. Exhaust curled into the damp November air, thick and gray. The porch steps groaned under my boots. I didn't knock. I had just left 10 minutes ago after dropping off her mail. I pushed the door open, the hinges silent in my defective world. The house smelled like bleach and burnt vanilla, a sterile, desperate combination that always made the back of my throat itch. Harper had been cleaning frantically for weeks. Ever since Wyatt moved out, she was trying to scrub his existence out of the hardwood. I walked toward the kitchen, my boots squeaking faintly on the linoleum. The hearing aid was right where I left it, a tiny beige crescent resting beside the toaster. I picked it up, rubbed the cold plastic between my thumb and forefinger, and shoved it into my ear. I rolled the tiny volume dial. A sharp electronic squeal pierced my eardrum, followed by the sudden, rushing re-entry of the world. The refrigerator hummed, the radiator hissed, and then a voice. It was coming from the dining room, just around the corner. Harper. She wasn't crying. She wasn't using that fragile bird-like tone she adopted whenever Wyatt's name came up. Her voice was flat, dead, the sound of a steel door swinging shut. Tonight, we end this. I froze. My hand hovered over the kitchen counter, fingertips pressing into the fake granite. I don't care, Evelyn, Harper said. A chair scraped against the wood floor. I don't care if it's messy. The digitalis is already in the ice trays. It's frozen into the cubes. When he comes over to sign the equity papers at 8, he'll ask for his scotch. He always asks for his scotch, and he always takes 3 cubes. My stomach dropped, entirely bypassing my gut and landing somewhere near my boots. I stopped breathing. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt too thick to pull into my lungs. Evelyn, her friend from the clinic, murmured something indistinguishable through the phone. Autopsy? Harper let out a dry, rattling laugh that sounded nothing like my little girl. It sounded like an old woman who had spent a lifetime smoking cheap cigarettes. Let them look. By the time they test for foxglove, he'll be ashes. I forged his signature on a cremation directive last month. He's going in the ground, Evie. Or I am. He told me last night he's taking the house. He's taking the dog. He said if I fight him, he'll post the videos. A heavy, suffocating silence hung in the air. He doesn't get to win, Harper whispered. The vulnerability finally cracked through, her voice trembling, wet with unshed tears. He doesn't get to ruin me and just walk away. 8 o'clock. It's done. I didn't step around the corner. I didn't walk in and wrap my arms around her. 10 years ago, I would have. I would have played the protective father, told her everything was going to be all right, promised to call a lawyer. But 10 years ago, I didn't know how the world actually worked. I didn't know that guys like Wyatt, men with tailored suits, trust funds, and venom in their veins, never lost in court. I backed out of the kitchen, heel to toe, careful, slow. I twisted the doorknob, stepped out onto the porch, and pulled the door shut with a soft, definitive click. The rain hit my face, cold and biting. I walked back to the truck, climbed inside, and gripped the steering wheel. The cheap plastic rim felt slippery under my calloused hands. I looked at the dashboard clock. It was 3:15 p.m. My daughter was going to murder her husband in less than 5 hours. And the worst part wasn't that she was going to kill him. The worst part was that she was going to get caught. I sat in the truck for 20 minutes, listening to the rain drum against the roof. The smell of old vinyl, stale coffee, and gasoline filled the cab, grounding me. I needed to think. My brain felt like a rusted gear grinding without oil. Digitalis in the ice cubes. It was a nurse's plan. Harper worked administrative at the cardiology clinic, so she had access. She had the knowledge. It was smart on paper. But murder isn't done on paper. Murder is done in living rooms with tacky rugs. It's done with shaking hands and sweating palms. If Wyatt dropped dead in her house, the cops would turn the place upside down. They'd take the glasses. They'd check the freezer. They'd look at her internet search history. She was a kindergarten teacher turned clinic receptionist, not a cartel hitman. The first time a detective in a cheap suit raised his voice in an interrogation room, she would shatter. They would lock her in a concrete box for 40 years. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes until fireworks exploded in the darkness. Wyatt. Just thinking his name made my gums ache. He was 32, drove a leased BMW, and smiled like a politician who knew you were poor. He had spent 5 years meticulously dismantling my daughter. It started small comments about her weight, isolating her from her friends. Then came the accidents. The sprained wrist from a fall on the stairs. The split lip from a clumsy collision with a cabinet door. I had confronted him once. 3 years ago. I waited for him outside his gym. I told him if he ever laid a hand on her again, I'd break his jaw. Wyatt hadn't even blinked. He just smiled, wiped the sweat from his forehead with a monogram towel, and said, "Frank, if you touch me, I'll have you arrested for assault, and Harper will testify against you. Because she loves me. And because you're nothing." He was right. She defended him. I looked like the unhinged blue-collar dad trying to ruin her perfect marriage. I backed off. I swallowed my pride, chewed on my failure every single day, and watched my daughter wither away from the sidelines. Not today. I shifted the truck into drive. The tires spun in the mud before catching the asphalt. I didn't drive toward the police station. Cops stealing evidence, and Wyatt hadn't left any. I didn't drive to Wyatt's apartment either. I drove to my own house, a cramped, single-story box on the edge of town where the lawn was mostly dirt and crabgrass. Inside, the house smelled like dust and solitude. I walked straight to the garage. The fluorescent bulb flickered overhead, casting a sickly yellow pallor over my workbench. I moved a pile of greasy rags and opened the bottom drawer of my heavy-duty tool chest. Beneath a jumble of socket wrenches and spare spark plugs lay a heavy canvas roll. I untied the leather strap and unrolled it. Inside was a pipe wrench. It was solid iron, 18 inches long, heavy enough to strip a stubborn 2-inch galvanized pipe or shatter a cinder block. The handle was cold. I picked it up, feeling the center of gravity. It weighed about 6 pounds, but in my grip, it felt like the anchor of the world. If Harper went through with her plan, her life was over. She would take a life and lose her own in the process. I couldn't let her carry that rot. I've lived 58 years. My knees are shot. My hearing is going, and my pension is a joke. I didn't have much left to give her. But I could give her this. I could take the sin. I wrapped the wrench in an old towel and shoved it into a duffel bag. I added a pair of thick rubber work gloves, a roll of duct tape, and a handful of heavy-duty zip ties I used for securing PVC pipes. I checked my watch. 4:30 p.m. Wyatt worked at a boutique wealth management firm downtown. He usually left the office around 6, went to his upscale condo to shower and change, and then headed out for his evening. Tonight, he was heading to Harper's at 8. I wasn't going to let him make it to 8. I walked into my bathroom and stared at the mirror. Deep lines carved brackets around my mouth. Gray stubble dusted my jaw. My eyes looked tired. Dead. Almost. I turned on the faucet, splashing freezing water onto my face. It dripped off my nose, soaking the collar of my flannel shirt. I took out the hearing aid and set it carefully on the edge of the sink. I didn't want to hear what I was about to do. I didn't want the sounds of it echoing in my head for whatever time I had left. The muffled, underwater silence returned, thick and absolute. I grabbed the duffel bag, locked the front door behind me, and drove toward the city skyline, watching the rain wash the dirt from my windshield. The underground parking garage beneath Wyatt's high-rise condo smelled of damp concrete and the sharp metallic tang of expensive car exhaust. I knew the building well. 2 years ago, the management company had hired my firm to retrofit the boiler system. I spent 3 weeks in the subterranean guts of this place. I still had the master key fob on my ring. It was a security violation I usually felt guilty about. Not today. I bypassed the security gate by taking the service alley, swiping the fob at the rusted metal door near the dumpsters. The magnetic lock disengaged with a heavy clunk that I felt through the heavy steel handle rather than heard. Inside, the air was warm and stale. I moved through the utility corridor, keeping to the shadows. My boots made no sound in my silent world, but I walked carefully, placing my heels down softly just in case. The duffel bag slung over my shoulder bumped against my ribs, a heavy, rhythmic reminder of the iron inside. I reached the second sub-level where the residents parked. The lighting was stark, buzzing fluorescent tubes that cast harsh reflections off the hoods of Mercedes, Audis, and Teslas. I found Wyatt's car easily. A slate gray BMW parked in spot 42, closest to the private elevator. I ducked behind a concrete pillar, the rough texture scraping through my flannel shirt, and waited. Time loses its shape when you're waiting to do something terrible. My mind kept trying to wander, drifting to stupid, trivial things. I thought about the leaky faucet in my kitchen that I needed to fix. I thought about the price of eggs. I thought about Harper when she was 6, wearing a yellow raincoat, stomping in puddles until her boots filled with water. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing the memory away. I couldn't afford to see her innocent right now. I needed to see the bruises. I needed to remember the hollow, terrified look in her eyes when she told me Wyatt had taken her phone. A vibration rippled through the floor. A car was approaching. I peeked around the edge of the pillar. The sleek nose of the BMW rounded the corner, headlights cutting through the dim garage. It slid smoothly into spot 42. The engine cut off. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic, caged bird. Sweat prickled at my hairline, stinging my eyes. I unzipped the duffel bag. My hands were shaking. I hated that they were shaking. I gripped the iron pipe wrench, pulling it out of the towel. The cold metal instantly grounded me. The driver's side door clicked open. Wyatt stepped out. He was wearing a dark, tailored suit that probably cost more than my truck. His hair was slicked back, perfect despite the rain outside. He grabbed a leather briefcase from the passenger seat, kicked the door shut with a polished Oxford shoe, and pressed the lock button on his fob. The car lights flashed. He started walking toward the elevator, his back to me. He was whistling. I couldn't hear it, but I could see the shape of his lips, the casual, arrogant sway of his shoulders. He was on his way to destroy my daughter, and he was whistling. Acid chewed at the lining of my stomach. I stepped out from behind the pillar. I didn't run. My knees wouldn't allow it anyway. I walked with heavy, deliberate strides, closing the distance between us. 15 feet, 10 feet. He must have caught my reflection in the polished glass of the elevator doors, or maybe he felt the vibration of my boots. He stopped, turning around with a look of mild irritation that quickly shifted to surprise. His mouth moved. He was saying something. Probably my name. Probably something condescending. I didn't care. I didn't want to hear his voice. I swung the wrench. I didn't aim for his head. I wasn't a butcher. I swung low, putting the rotation of my hips into it, targeting the side of his left knee. The heavy iron connected with a sickening, solid resistance. I felt the bone give way through the handle, a violent shudder that vibrated all the way up my arm to my shoulder. Wyatt's mouth ripped open in a silent scream. His briefcase dropped, papers spilling across the greasy concrete. His leg crumpled beneath him, folding inward at an unnatural angle. He hit the ground hard, his chin bouncing off the pavement. I stepped over him. My breathing was ragged, my chest heaving. The adrenaline tasted like copper in the back of my throat. He rolled onto his back, clutching his shattered knee, his face pale and contorted in agony. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of pain and absolute terror. He scrambled backward, dragging himself away with his hands, his expensive suit soaking up the dirty water pooling on the garage floor. He was shouting now, begging, threatening. I didn't know, and I didn't care. The silence in my head was a blessing. It reduced him from a smooth-talking manipulator to just a pathetic, broken animal on the floor. I walked up to him, grabbed the lapels of his suit with my left hand, and hauled him halfway up. He was heavy, dead weight, but the rage gave me strength I hadn't felt in 20 years. I shoved him back against the concrete wall, his head connected with a dull thud. I raised the wrench again, holding it inches from his face. He flinched, squeezing his eyes shut, raising his hands in a futile gesture of surrender. I didn't hit him. I let him hang there for a second, feeling the terror radiate off him like heat from a furnace. Then, I reached into my pocket with my wrench hand, awkward and clumsy, and pulled out my phone. I unlocked it, opened the notepad app, and typed a single sentence. I shoved the screen into his face. Give me her phone. The videos. Now. Wyatt blinked, his chest heaving as he stared at the screen. He looked from the phone to the iron wrench hovering near his temple. He nodded frantically, a pathetic, jerky motion. With shaking hands, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek, silver smartphone. Harper's old phone. The one he kept as leverage. He handed it to me, his fingers smeared with grease and dirt. I took the phone, slipped it into my pocket, and then looked back at him. He thought it was over. He slumped against the wall, a weak, breathless sigh escaping his lips. I tightened my grip on the wrench. I had the phone. I had the leverage. But I knew Wyatt. A broken knee wouldn't stop him. The moment he healed, the moment he got a lawyer, he would come for her again. He would find another way to ruin her. A man like this doesn't learn from pain. He only learns to hide his fangs better. I couldn't just leave him here to plot his revenge. I had to finish it. I looked at the iron in my hand. I thought about the weight of it, the permanence of it. I dropped the wrench. It clattered against the concrete. Wyatt opened his eyes, confusion warring with the pain. I reached into the duffel bag slung across my chest. I didn't pull out a weapon. I pulled out a small, heavy black box, a portable hydraulic jack, and a thick pair of wire cutters. I knelt beside him. He tried to squirm away, but his shattered knee wouldn't let him. I grabbed him by the collar and dragged him back to the front of his BMW. I didn't need to kill him. Harper didn't need to be a widow. She just needed him to disappear. She needed him ruined, stripped of the polished veneer that let him walk through the world untouched. I shoved the hydraulic jack under the front bumper of his car and started pumping the handle. The BMW groaned as the front end lifted off the ground. Wyatt watched me, eyes darting frantically, trying to understand. I grabbed the wire cutters and slid under the car. The undercarriage smelled of hot metal and road salt. I found the main brake line running along the chassis. With 2 hands, I squeezed the cutters. The thick steel line snapped. Brake fluid began to weep from the severed ends, dripping onto the concrete like dark, viscous blood. I slid back out. Wyatt was staring at the puddle forming under his car. I pulled my phone out again, typed another note, and shoved it in his face. You leave town tonight. You don't sign the papers. You don't call her. You disappear. If you don't, I give this phone to the cops. And next time, I don't swing at your knee. He read it, his jaw trembling. He looked at the severed brake line, then at me. The realization settled over him. I had his leverage, and I had just destroyed his car. He was stranded, broken, and beaten by a man he considered garbage. He nodded slowly, defeated. I picked up my wrench, shoved it into the bag, and turned away. I didn't look back. I walked toward the service door, the silence in my head finally feeling like peace. It wasn't a clean victory. It was messy, brutal, and thoroughly illegal. I was leaving a wounded man in a dark basement, But as I pushed open the heavy steel door and stepped back out into the cold, driving rain, the acid in my stomach was gone. Harper wouldn't become a killer tonight. She would wait with her poisoned ice cubes, and Wyatt would never show up. She would eventually pour the scotch down the drain, thinking he had simply abandoned her again. She would be angry, maybe even heartbroken, but she would be free. I climbed into my truck, tossed the bag onto the passenger seat, and gripped the steering wheel. My hands were still shaking, and my joints ached with a deep, punishing fire. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the hearing aid, and pushed it into my ear. The rain hammered against the roof. The engine roared to life. It was the best thing I had ever heard. I pulled the truck into the cracked asphalt lot of a 24-hour diner on the edge of the city limits. The rain was coming down in sheets now, heavy and relentless, turning the world outside the windshield into a smeared, watery painting. I killed the engine. The wipers stopped mid-swipe, leaving a thick band of water to slowly drag itself down the glass. The cab descended into a heavy, suffocating quiet, save for the rhythmic drumming on the roof and the faint, high-pitched ringing in my bad ear that never fully went away. I sat there for a long time. My breathing was shallow. The adrenaline crash was starting to hit, settling into my joints like poured lead. My right hand, the one that had gripped the heavy iron wrench, was locked into a stiff, trembling claw. I tried to stretch my fingers, wincing as a sharp, electric pain shot up my forearm. I had swung that pipe wrench with everything I had left in my 58-year-old body, and my tendons were making me pay for it. I looked down at the passenger seat. The heavy canvas duffel bag sat there, dark and innocuous. Beside it rested the sleek, silver smartphone I had taken from Wyatt. I reached out and picked up the phone. It was cold. The screen was smeared with a greasy thumbprint, Wyatt's fear left behind in a physical smudge. I wiped it clean on the flannel of my shirt. I pressed the power button. The screen illuminated the dim cab with a harsh, bluish glare, stinging my tired eyes. There was no passcode. Wyatt was arrogant. He didn't think anyone would ever dare take it from him, let alone a broken-down old plumber. I tapped the photo gallery icon. My stomach clenched, acidic and tight. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see the private, manufactured humiliations my daughter had endured, but I needed to be sure. I needed to know exactly what kind of chains Wyatt had wrapped around her neck. There was a hidden folder labeled Leverage. It made me want to throw up. I opened it. There were a dozen short video clips. I clicked the first one. The volume was low, but with my hearing aid turned up, the audio crackled into my ear. It was Harper. She was sitting on the floor of their master bathroom, wearing an oversized t-shirt, her knees pulled up to her chest. Her eyes were red-rimmed, bloodshot, and wide with a manic, terrified energy. She was sobbing, rocking back and forth, pleading with Wyatt to just let her sleep. Wyatt's voice came from behind the camera, calm, clinical, utterly detached. He was asking her if she had taken her pills. He was asking her if she was having another psychotic break. He was feeding her the narrative, recording her at her absolute lowest, most chemically imbalanced moment, a moment he had likely induced by hiding her actual medication and replacing it with something else. I watched 5 seconds of it before my thumb slammed against the pause button. My breathing grew jagged. The small confines of the truck felt like a shrinking box. The air tasted stale, metallic. I rolled down the window an inch, letting the freezing rain spit against my cheek. I needed the shock of the cold to keep me from driving back to that underground garage and finishing the job. I had only broken his knee. It wasn't enough. It felt woefully, pathetically insufficient. I went through the rest of the folder, not watching the videos, just checking the file details. I found the cloud backup settings. He had them synced to a private server. I spent the next 45 minutes navigating the phone settings, meticulously deleting the files from the local storage, wiping the cloud backups, and finally, executing a complete factory reset of the device. The screen went black, then rebooted to a generic welcome screen. The chains were gone. I tossed the phone onto the floorboard. I would smash it to pieces with a hammer when I got back to my own garage, but for now, it was just useless glass and plastic. I checked the glowing green numbers on my dashboard clock. 7, 15, Pam. 45 minutes until Wyatt was supposed to walk into Harper's dining room, ask for his scotch, and swallow a lethal dose of foxglove. I needed a cup of coffee. I opened the truck door, stepping out into the freezing deluge. The icy water soaked instantly through the shoulders of my jacket. I shoved my trembling hands deep into my pockets and walked toward the diner. The red neon sign buzzed overhead, the letter N, completely burnt out, casting a sickly pink glow over the wet pavement. The diner smelled exactly how I expected it to: burnt frying oil, stale bleached floors, and old bitter coffee. The linoleum was scuffed yellow. A lone waitress with tired eyes and a stained pink apron stood behind the counter, wiping down the formica with a gray rag. There was only one other customer, an old man in a trucker hat hunched over a plate of eggs in the far corner booth. I sat at the counter, the vinyl stool groaning under my weight. "Just coffee," I said, my voice sounding rough, like dry leaves scraping across concrete. "Black." The waitress nodded, wordlessly turning to grab a glass pot off the burner. She poured the dark, steaming liquid into a thick ceramic mug and pushed it across the counter toward me. "Rough night out there," she muttered, not really looking at me. "Yeah," I replied, wrapping my cold hands around the mug. The heat seeped into my aching joints, offering a momentary, pathetic comfort. "It's coming down hard." I stared into the black surface of the coffee. My reflection looked back at me, distorted and dark. I looked old. I looked like a man who had spent his entire life following the rules, paying his taxes, keeping his head down, only to realize the game was rigged from the start. If I hadn't gone back for that stupid hearing aid, if I had just driven home and watched a baseball game with a cheap beer, Harper would be a murderer by 8:15 p.m. She would have watched Wyatt choke, watched his heart stutter and fail, and she would carry that dark, rotting secret for the rest of her life, until the cops inevitably kicked her door down. I took a sip of the coffee. It tasted like battery acid and burnt dirt. It was perfect. I sat there for 30 minutes, letting the clock tick closer to the hour. At 7:45 p.m., I threw a crumpled $5 bill onto the counter, walked back out into the rain, and climbed into my truck. It was time to go back to the cotton world. It was time to watch the ice melt. The drive back to Harper's house took 12 minutes. I drove under the speed limit, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned a sharp, bloodless white. The rain was finally beginning to slacken, reducing to a fine, misty drizzle that clung to the windshield like a gray fog. I parked the F-150 on the street this time, 2 houses down from hers, cutting the headlights before I brought the truck to a complete stop. I didn't want my headlights sweeping across her living room windows. I wanted to approach like a ghost. I zipped my jacket up to my chin, stepping out onto the wet asphalt. The neighborhood was dead quiet, the kind of suburban silence that feels heavy, oppressive, loaded with secrets behind drawn blinds. I walked up the sidewalk, my boots making soft, squelching sounds against the wet concrete. I stopped at the edge of her driveway and looked at the house. The porch light was on, casting a harsh yellow pool across the wooden steps. The living room curtains were drawn tightly shut, but I could see the faint, flickering glow of a television screen seeping through the edges of the fabric. I checked my watch. 6 p.m. Wyatt was late. In Harper's mind, he was just running behind. He was making her wait, asserting his dominance one last time before he arrived to claim his property. I walked up the porch steps. I didn't try to be quiet this time. I let my boots thud heavily against the wood. I reached out and knocked on the door. 3 solid raps. I waited. The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 20. I could imagine her standing on the other side of the door, her heart hammering against her ribs, holding her breath, trying to summon the courage to open the door to the man she was about to kill. The deadbolt clicked. A loud, metallic snap. The door opened 2 inches. Harper's face appeared in the narrow gap. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown out, surrounded by dark, bruised circles of exhaustion. Her skin was the color of old parchment. When she saw it was me, a complex wave of emotions washed over her face: shock, immediate relief, and then a sudden, blinding panic. Dad, her voice was a cracked, breathless whisper. What? What are you doing here? Left my reading glasses on the table, I lied, keeping my voice flat, casual, the same tone I used when asking about the weather. Figured I'd swing by and grab them before I settled in for the night. Dad, you can't be here, she said, her fingers gripping the edge of the door so hard her nails dug into the white paint. You have to leave. Right now. Why? I asked, pushing gently against the door. You expecting company? Wyatt is coming over, she blurted out, her voice trembling, rising in pitch. He's coming at 8. He's going to be here any second, Dad. Please. You can't be here when he gets here. You know how he gets. It'll just make things worse. It's 8:05, Harp, I said, stepping forward, forcing her to either let me in or physically push me away. She stepped back, defeated. I walked into the entryway. The house smelled heavily of scotch, peaty, sharp, and medicinal. The smell hit the back of my throat like a physical blow. I walked past her, heading straight for the dining room. The table was perfectly set. A single stack of legal documents sat in the center, flanked by a black ballpoint pen. And there, resting on a leather coaster near the head of the table, was a heavy crystal tumbler. It was filled with 2 fingers of expensive, amber liquid. Floating in the scotch were 3 large, perfectly square ice cubes. I stared at the glass. The condensation had already begun to form on the outside of the crystal. Tiny beads of moisture weeping down the sides, pooling onto the leather coaster. The ice was starting to crackle, melting slowly into the alcohol, releasing the digitalis into the drink. Dad, please, Harper begged, coming up behind me. She grabbed my arm, her fingers desperately pulling at my damp jacket sleeve. Go out the back. If his car pulls up and he sees your truck. He's not coming, Harper, I said. I didn't turn around. I just kept staring at the glass, watching the edges of the ice cubes soften and blur. What? She stopped pulling. The air in the room seemed to freeze. What do you mean? I mean, guys like Wyatt, they like to play games, I said, improvising, trying to find the words that would make her let this go without revealing the broken man bleeding out in a parking garage downtown. He probably decided to make you sweat, to make you wait. He's not showing up tonight. You don't know that, she whispered, her voice tight with panic. You don't know him. I know he's a coward, I said, finally turning to look at her. She looked so small. She was 30 years old, but right now, she looked exactly like she did when she was 7, standing in the kitchen after dropping a plate, terrified of the consequences. She was vibrating with an anxious, raw energy. She was standing on the absolute edge of a cliff, and she thought she had to jump. Dad. She looked from me to the glass on the table. Her eyes darted frantically. She knew I was looking at the drink. She knew I knew Wyatt only drank scotch. I reached out and picked up the crystal tumbler. The glass was freezing against my skin. The heavy weight of the liquor sloshed against the melting ice. Dad, put that down, she said, her voice dropping into a dangerous, urgent register. She lunged forward, reaching for the glass. Don't touch that. I held it out of her reach. Why? It's just a drink, isn't it? Frank, give me the glass. It was the first time she had called me by my first name in years. It tore through the quiet room, sharp and desperate. I looked into her eyes. I didn't see a cold-blooded killer. I didn't see a calculating widow. I saw a trapped animal gnawing off its own leg to escape a steel trap. It's over, Harper, I said softly. I pitched my voice low, dropping the facade of the confused old man. I let her hear the gravel, the absolute certainty in my tone. He's not coming tonight. He's not coming tomorrow. The videos are gone. The leverage is gone. He's done. She froze. The breath hitched in her throat. A sharp, ragged gasp. Her eyes widened, searching my face, scanning the bruised knuckles on my left hand, taking in the wet, disheveled state of my clothes, the dark intensity in my eyes. What did you do? she whispered, the words barely making it past her lips. I took care of a plumbing problem, I said. My face, a mask of stone, a nasty leak. Had to cap the pipe. It was messy, but it holds. She stared at me. Her mind was racing, connecting the dots, trying to comprehend the sheer impossible weight of what I was implying. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The terror in her eyes slowly, agonizingly, began to fracture. A wet, shiny glaze formed over her corneas. I didn't wait for her to process it. I turned away from her, holding the sweating crystal glass, and walked out of the dining room. I crossed the short hallway into the kitchen. The stainless steel sink gleamed under the fluorescent lights. I tipped the glass forward. The amber liquid cascaded down the metal drain, a smooth, dark ribbon of poison washing away into the city sewer lines. The 3 ice cubes tumbled out of the glass, clattering loudly against the stainless steel basin. I turned on the hot water faucet. The water blasted over the frozen blocks of digitalis, steam rising instantly as the hot water attacked the cold. I stood there, watching the ice melt, watching the deadly, frozen water dissolve into nothingness, swirling down the drain, taking the terrible mistake she almost made with it. I heard footsteps behind me, soft, shuffling. Harper stepped up beside me. She looked down into the sink. The ice was gone, just an empty basin and the smell of hot, metallic water. She reached out, her trembling hand finding my arm. She didn't grip my jacket this time. She slid her hand down, wrapping her small, cold fingers around my thick, bruised knuckles. She didn't ask any more questions. She didn't want the details. She didn't want to know about the iron wrench, or the shattered bone, or the severed brake lines in the dark basement of the city. She just leaned her head against my shoulder, her body shaking as the first, heavy sobs finally broke through her chest. I let go of the empty glass. I wrapped my heavy arms around her, pulling her against my chest. The smell of bleach and burnt vanilla in her hair was still there, but beneath it, the scent of fear was slowly beginning to fade. "It's okay," I murmured, my cheek resting against the top of her head. The hearing aid in my ear picked up the sound of her crying, loud and jagged in the silent kitchen. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." We stood there for a long time, the hot water still running in the sink, washing the last remnants of the monster out of our lives. I was a flawed man. I was cynical, tired, and carrying a secret that could put me behind bars for the rest of my miserable life. I had crossed a line that I could never uncross. But as I held my daughter, feeling the tension slowly drain from her spine, I realized I didn't care. The silence in the house wasn't a liar anymore. It was just quiet. And for the first time in 5 years, it was finally our own. Did this dark, suspenseful tale keep you on the edge of your seat? If you love the raw emotion, sensory details, and the gritty twists of Frank and Harper's story, don't keep it to yourself. Smash that like button, share this video with your friends who love a good revenge drama, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more deeply human, thrilling storytelling. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a gripping new story.